Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. Carl Jung. Jack-o'-lantern is one of the many monsters that you will encounter during your time through Persona 5 as you traipse through the metaverse, a realm representing the unconscious aspects of the mind. These shadows make up the bulk of the obstacles on Joker's journey to steal the hearts of adults who have been overtaken by selfish desires. Every person Joker meets in the real world has a corresponding shadow in the metaverse, and beyond that are the monstrous foes that make up the hordes of enemies throughout the palaces and mementos. These beings are more than mere monsters. They are intelligent, with drives and motives of their own. A main mechanic of the game is the ability to negotiate with shadows by holding them at gunpoint, negotiate might be sugarcoating it a little bit, and convince them to join your side. When they do so, they recall their names and become another one of Joker's persona, masks that unleash different supernatural powers in the metaverse. The shadows of Persona come in hundreds of different forms, and the source of their designs are pretty clearly demonstrated as soon as you learn their name. Let's take Arsene, the first persona that you'll encounter on your journey and Joker's primary mask. Arsene takes his name from the protagonist of French writer Maurice Leblanc's novels and novellas, a gentleman thief named Arsène Lupin. Lupin is often called the French counterpart to Sherlock Holmes, and he has appeared in 17 novels and 39 novellas. This influence is worn on Persona 5's sleeve, with the cafe and hub area Leblanc even named after Lupin's creator himself. Beyond this, we have pixies, jack-o'-lanterns, mandrakes, incubus, and so much more. Even with a layperson's knowledge of mythology, you would be able to recognize the majority of the shadows in Persona represented here from all manner of different fiction, myth, and religions. What's far more interesting is what these shadows and many of the other elements of the metaverse and Persona's characters represent when taken as a whole. All of this has its roots with Carl Jung, a famous Swiss psychiatrist who worked throughout the first half of the 20th century and founded a field known as analytical psychology. Jung was a contemporary with Sigmund Freud, and I'm sure I don't need to tell you anything about Freud, nor do I really want to. For many years, Freud and Jung kept a close correspondence, but in 1912, when Jung published his work, Psychology of the Unconscious, this heralded a major schism between the two psychologists. One of the major principles that led to the rise of popularity of psychology was the notion of the unconscious, an aspect of the mind composed of mental processes inaccessible to the conscious mind, that has influence on our feelings and behavior. Though Freud and Jung both agreed on the existence of the unconscious, they both had very different ideas on the driving forces. Freud famously, or perhaps it would be more accurate to say infamously, taught that sexual development and libido were the primary driving forces of human behavior and unconscious processes. Jung, on the other hand, promoted a concept he called the collective unconscious. There tends to be a misconception that the collective unconscious is a sort of realm shared by everyone's minds, that we are all somehow connected to this one collective. That's not quite what Jung had in mind. Jung's disagreement with Freud stems from the latter's beliefs being rooted in a theory known as tabula rasa, most famously associated with English philosopher John Locke's 1689 work, an essay concerning human understanding. Tabula rasa, Latin for blank slate, is a theory that individuals are born without any mental content and derive all of their knowledge from experience. This theory put all the weight on the nurture side of the nature-nurture debate, and informed Freud's theory that personality traits and neuroses were formed almost entirely from early life experiences and family interactions. Instead, Jung believed that there was a part of the mind that was inherited, that humans were born with. This collective unconscious contained the memories and ideas of our ancestors and, like our physical organs, was formed through evolution. Jung believed that we could experience this unconscious through symbols, dreams, art, religion, and even paradigms played out in relationships and lifelong pursuits. In Persona, this concept is given shape in the metaverse. The metaverse is composed of pockets of the collective unconscious, either palaces for people with particularly strong unconscious desires, or the broader mementos that may more closely resemble the often inaccurate concept of the collective unconscious as a shared psychic realm. Mementos is composed of the collective desires, anxieties, and obstacles of people as a whole. It's affected by real-life issues, perhaps most obviously illustrated in the game's weather system. For example, on a day when there is a pollen warning in Shibuya, the shadows and mementos are likely to fall asleep thanks to their real-world counterparts having to take allergy medicine that induces drowsiness. Yeah, I know how you feel, little shadow. Like physical organs, Jung believed that the unconscious was composed of many different parts. Jung called these various parts of the unconscious archetypes. These are innate and universal prototypes for groups of ideas that humans use unconsciously to interpret and categorize observations. In a sense, these are the psychic counterpart of instinct. They manifest in behavior or interaction with the outside world and can be described and categorized as motifs that appear throughout history. There are archetypal events that occur throughout most people's lives: birth and death, separation from parents, and marriage are some examples. On a larger scale are archetypal motifs, concepts like the creation of life, the apocalypse, and the Great Flood that appear in many religions across the world. Finally, there are archetypal figures, character concepts that appear over and over again throughout history and folklore, like the mother, the father, the child, the devil, the god, the wise man, the hero, and the trickster. The very title given to Joker by Igor. In fact, you'll meet a number of representations of the archetypes on your journey. Persona uses the 22 major arcana of tarot to represent each of your confidants in a variety of persona, each major character embodying one of these prototypes, such as the hermit, the fool, or the hierophant. One of Jung's archetypes is the spiritual guide, figures that appear to offer wisdom and guidance to characters throughout many stories. Going back to the first few Persona games, there was even a guiding figure to the protagonist known as Philemon, taking his name directly from Jung's personal spiritual guide whom, according to Jung's memories, dreams, and reflections, appeared to Jung in his dreams. However, I would be both remiss and a false advertiser if I failed to mention arguably one of the most important aspects of the unconscious. Though we may show parts of ourselves to the light, there is always a shadow cast in the process. The shadow, in Jung's terms, is a representation of the personal unconscious, formed by our experiences, a counterpart to what Freud would call the id, embodying compensating values to those held by the conscious personality. It is composed of the aspects of oneself that are not consciously acknowledged, or even that are rejected and suppressed. For example, a person who sees themselves as kind and sympathetic may have a shadow that is harsh and callous. Contrary to popular belief, though, shadows are not necessarily bad or evil. They can also represent hidden positive qualities, especially in those who have anxiety or self-doubt. This is perhaps most apparent with Futaba. Stricken by grief and battered down by adults, she repressed the part of herself that knew the truth about her mother's mysterious death. Instead of suppressing doubts or anxieties, Futaba turned away from the harsh truth that she was cheated and decided that it was easier to blame herself. Thus, Futaba's shadow helps her to learn and accept the truth. The connections of Jung's concept with the in-game shadows are as clear as their mythological inspirations, and in fact offer an explanation as to why shadows are what they are. Persona's hundreds of shadows are all straight from myth, many of them monsters or deities, and they are this way precisely because they are given embodiment in the collective unconscious. Those feelings of fear, doubt, anger, sadness, and above all desire that are rejected in the real world manifest in the collective unconscious as monsters that take the shape of ancestral symbols passed down in the unconscious. For example, you're not really fighting a succubus here. Rather, you're fighting suppressed or rejected feelings likely having to do with unwanted or unrecognized sexual desires. We see the worst of this in palaces, Persona's representation of complexes. In psychoanalytical terms, a complex is a pattern of emotions, memories, perceptions, and desires that typically result in unhealthy fixations and behaviors. For Jung, archetypes were the central organizing structure of the complex. Desire is the key word here and is openly discussed during the course of the game. These strong desires, these complexes, are rooted in archetypes represented by the game's bosses. Each shadow boss in the game is a representation of one of the 7 deadly sins. Kamoshida, known for being sexually abusive, has a shadow that keeps company with bikini-clad versions of his students. When entering a boss fight with Kamoshida's shadow, say that 3 times fast, we discover that its true identity is Asmodeus, the archdemon representing the deadly sin of lust. Each palace in the game is a complex formed around the strong desires associated with these sins. Even with all of that said, there's still a major aspect of these games that we've yet to discuss: their namesake. The term persona comes from the Latin word referring to a traditional Grecian theater mask, large masks with exaggerated expressions representing individual characters on stage, so that even people far back in the audience could interpret the emotion of the scene. Jung used the term persona to refer to a metaphorical mask, the social face or facade that an individual presents to the world. Jung believed that we all wore masks, many of us a variety of them, for any number of social situations in order to make impressions on others, as well as conceal aspects of our true nature. It can be something as simple as the professional and serious tone and posture we take during an interview, or the bombastic personality displayed online to entertain the viewers. Developing persona is part of preparing for the adult social world, a way through which we may relate to the outside world in different circumstances. In Persona 5, Joker is one of the only people capable of possessing multiple persona, much in the same way that Joker's quiet, contemplative, and observative disposition allows the player to project some of their personality on him. These very same traits allow him to present himself, or rather allow the player to present him, in different ways to the different people that he meets. This even manifests as a game mechanic. Holding a persona of the same arcana as the confidant you're spending time with gives you more points towards increasing your relationship rank with them. Putting on the right mask, empathizing with the perspective of the other, is fundamental to becoming stronger in the game's mechanics.
I'm a sharpshooter at Post Masquerade.
But why is it that Joker is able to convert shadows into persona for him to wield? How did these persona get unleashed in our party members? To answer these questions, we have to discuss the ultimate purpose in analytical psychology: self-actualization. For Jung, self-actualization occurred through a process known as individuation, through which a person attains a conscious individuality and existence separate from the identity of others. The self was both the center and the whole of the conscious and unconscious, and the goal of self-actualization was to encounter elements of the unconscious, of the psyche, and bring them to consciousness. This process was the goal of therapy through the lens of analytical psychology, and it begins with the dissolution of the persona. In a sense, this first step is like the breaking of the eggshell. Once this exterior mask is dissolved, the person can consciously confront the various aspects of the unconscious. This process of making the unconscious conscious is fundamental to self-actualization, of existing with self-understanding and control. In dissolving the persona, the self can confront the shadow. We know the exact moment when this occurs for Joker. When confronted with a life-changing event, in this case for Joker, having his life threatened, he becomes aware that he is wearing a mask, that there are parts of himself suppressed. This is when he first begins to hear Arsene's challenge. It is when Joker removes the mask that he is able to confront his shadow. We know how it turns out, quite well for him, but first let's break down the process. In the encounter with the shadow, Jung discusses a handful of outcomes. In one, the desires of the shadow can overwhelm the person in a process that we'll call possession. Though, really this is not in any kind of supernatural sense. The person gives in to the repressed urges and their actions reflect this. For Jung, this was an explanation of antisocial psychoses, violence, and the like. Individuation carries the risk of this occurrence, and we can see the results of what's very likely its parallel in the game. Kamoshida is overwhelmed by his shadow's lust for power and sex, so he flippantly abuses his students. The major shadows in the game, as well as those in some of the side quests, reflect the process of possession. Another potential example are the psychotic breakdowns. When a person's shadow in the metaverse goes berserk, the person's real-world counterpart will then completely snap, going on homicidal and self-destructive killing sprees. This is taking the concept of possession to the extreme though. These things don't really happen through therapy in the real world. The ideal outcome is assimilation and restoration. The person retains an awareness of their shadow but does not necessarily identify with it. They accept it as a part of themselves and build a new, more viable persona that's more realistic, more flexible, and allows them to navigate society without colliding with their true self. This is resolving what modern psychologists know as cognitive dissonance, or the feeling that one's actions or thoughts are incompatible with their true beliefs. By confronting what was unconscious and bringing it to consciousness, the person has a broader consciousness than before individuation. There is another outcome here, but we'll discuss that in a little bit. So let's break that down one more time. First, the dissolution of the persona, an emotionally difficult and painful process. Then, the confrontation of the unconscious, of the shadow. Finally, assimilation of the shadow and restoration of the stronger persona.
This power of mine is yours! Kill them however you want. Run wild to your heart's content!
Each of Joker's companions goes through this same process, coming out stronger and able to face the harsh truths of the world with hope and compassion. This is because the parts of themselves they haven't confronted are not lustful, selfish desires, but are discontent with the lot they have been given in an unjust world. It is their will of rebellion. Not only this, but the Phantom Thieves are able to quell the rampant shadows of the palace owners, and by stealing their heart, allow them to go through the process of individuation, that they might accept the gravity of their actions and atone for them. Joker's unique flexibility and guile further allows him to accept the various shadows of the metaverse as aspects of himself, as a means for navigating both the metaverse and the conscious world. This represents how in touch he is with the world around him, and with the people he meets along the way. He can find an aspect of each of these shadows, of each of these suppressed desires, that he finds relatable. The shadows in turn can relate to him, and are reminded that they are a part of the human world. However, I mentioned before that there is another outcome, and this one is not so kind. This final outcome is what's known as regressive restoration. In confronting the self, the person is unable to accept their shadow, and so they attempt to patch up their old persona to cover it back up. In this way, they hope to recover any social reputation within the stricter confines of a more limited personality. Joker's antithesis, the only other person in the game capable of wielding multiple persona, possibly represents this grave outcome. When you meet Goro Akechi, he oozes charisma. He presents himself as humble and sincere, but brilliant and compassionate. He seems capable of seeing under Joker's mask to some extent, but as you proceed through the game and learn more about him, you understand just how fragile Akechi's mask really is. Akechi is something of a tragic figure. His mother was a prostitute in the red light district, and had a fateful and likely unpleasant encounter with Masayoshi Shido, who would sire Akechi as an unrecognized bastard. His mother died when he was young, and he was passed around from orphanage to orphanage, all while he became obsessed with revenge against his father. As part of this plan, Akechi became obsessed with presenting an idealistic, embellished image of himself, completely at odds with his actions behind the scenes. The first of Akechi's personas that we meet is Robin Hood, an example of how Akechi wishes to present a good-natured will of justice, but this is just a mask to conceal his true personality and true desires. Akechi was forced to confront the evil of the world far too early, far sooner than Joker's encounter with Shido, and pieced together this facade to carry him to his goal of defeating Shido. His desire is twisted, but in his eyes, a path to justice. Akechi represents the dangers of compartmentalizing the self to the extreme, of wearing a mask opposed to his true nature. Fortunately, at the end, with Joker's support, he is redeemed as he confronts himself and the shadows of his past one last time. Or at least, that's how his story ends in the base game for Persona 5. Perhaps the differences in Royal permit an alternative, but who knows? But I recommend you discover the differences between the games for yourself. Shadow's Persona, the Metaverse, and Archetypes. Persona 5 and its predecessors are packed to the brim with representations of Jung's theory. Even though analytical psychology is more philosophy than science, Persona demonstrates the potential of self-acceptance. Unfortunately, no matter how hard I try, I can't seem to get cool warlock powers by going through introspection, but self-reflection and understanding are vital to mental well-being, and honestly, with everything going on right now, that might help. Thank you for watching, especially to my subscribers who stuck around during my long absence. Subscribe if you want more, ring the bell to know, and share your thoughts below. Follow me on Twitter for updates and join the Discord, now open to all viewers, to talk to me in the community. I am at the point in my life where it should be easier for me to make this channel considerably more active, and I'll be posting a notice for my comeback stream on Twitch soon. If you have funds to spare, Patreon is a great way to support me in this channel. These videos take a long time to make. But otherwise, just share this with your like-minded friends. Stay safe, everyone.